This is Voices for Climate, the podcast where activists, scientists, innovators, and everyday people speak out for our planet. If you're looking for honest conversations, bold ideas, and real climate solutions, you're in the right place. My name is Arnav, and today we're joined by Andrew Breithaupt. Andrew is an artist and educator using his artistic talents for climate action. After studying and later teaching technical illustration at Sheridan College and living abroad in Europe, he settled back in the United States and collaborated with sustainability nonprofits in Boston, building the Climate Carnival, a series of handcrafted games that teach people about sustainability and climate action. Now in the Bay Area, he continues using art to inspire environmental awareness in engaging ways. Andrew, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so to start off, can you share kind of what first drew you to climate activism and more specifically, kind of how your journey as an artist evolved into now a focus on climate and sustainability?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I guess what really motivated me, I've always kind of low-key cared about the earth and sustainability. But what really got me concerned and engaged was around 20, I think it was 2020. We had the pandemic, and here in the valley, we had tremendous wildfires. The sky turned orange, the sun turned into like a little dot. Um, and these two things made me realize, first of all, with the pandemic, that the government can't handle everything. Like there's a lot of things that it doesn't necessarily manage well. When I saw store shelves clearing out, I was like, oh man, maybe they don't quite know what to do. Same with with their response to climate and also their response to COVID. They're like, we're not sure what it is. It's evolving. Um, so that was kind of a wake up call for me. I had sort of this naive faith that everything was cool. Um, and so, that combined with the pollution of the smoke and it was like right on our doorstep, literally the climate crisis. And so I dug into it more. I realized how serious a problem it was. And I started to volunteer with local organizations, one of which was the Solar Rights Alliance, trying to promote household solar and, you know, keep PG&E from making solar more expensive for people. It should be less expensive. It's crazy that electricity is expensive as it is right now in California.
Yeah, that's a really inspiring journey. And then how did art kind of fit into that? Where did sort of the art element um kind of get added in?
Yeah, for sure. So uh, I saw a really good talk that explained that everybody has their own strengths, right? Um, and action is the best antidote for anxiety. And really, what I had to offer that was maybe more unique, because I'm not great at organizing, I'm not great at math, but I can do illustration and tell stories by making things, by making pictures, by building. And so this was what I had to offer. And this is how I got involved. With the Solar Rights Alliance, they had a campaign, for instance, which was to call the governor. And they were like, could we have like a phone booth or something that we could set up on the sidewalk just to draw people in, get their attention? So I made a bright red sort of British, emergency call phone booth. And people would go in there and they would call the governor with a little scripted call to promote, to keep them from raising the price of solar and forward their cause. Because I worked in theater as well,
Mhm.
designing and building sets. It's just another way of telling stories by creating stuff. Um, and so it's kind of like a logical extension. You create these objects that attract people's attention and draw them into your story. That's what the games ended up doing too.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And so, kind of on the topic of the Climate Carnival, so I guess first, before I ask you more in depth about it, for listeners who might not be familiar with your work, can you describe to us kind of what the Climate Carnival is and what inspired it in the first place?
Excellent. Yeah. The inspiration happened actually when I lived in the Boston area. And there was a high school sustainability club that said, we have an event coming up. Can you think of like a game that we could be playing at the event? And I was like, well, naturally, it should be climate themed, right? So I started looking around online, and also I remembered both my kids, they went to Montessori school, and the head of that school was an old Dutch guy, and he would bring these really cool wooden games to the events. Just simple, no plugs, no screens, just old school wooden games where you knock down pins or you balance stuff. It's like, well, maybe something like that would work. And so I found a concept for a game like that, and I just changed the theme to be about sustainability. And that's the game that ended up being called Pitfalls, and it sort of stands up like an A-frame, and you pull strings to control the Earth going up the
Wow.
surface and avoiding the pitfalls, which are common obstacles like everyday obstacles we run into, like climate denial, overconsumption, fossil fuel dependence, and you're working your way up to drop the Earth into a bright future at the top. And I had no idea whether it would be a hit or whether it would be like, yeah, this is cool, but thanks. And it was really well received. And when I saw like how engaging it was and what a great teaching tool it was, I was like, holy cow, that was my light bulb moment. It was like this could be a really good way to introduce concepts around a really difficult topic, and kind of get out into the community, and draw people over, at events to other organizations that are tabling that always have trouble, drawing people. Okay, come here, read this, uh, you know, brochure or sign this petition. They have like wheel games and stuff, but like, what if we kicked it up a notch and we had these games where people could actually come and actually try something that was a little more difficult, a little more involved. And so I started looking for more and more concepts like of these wooden games and mapping the themes to be about climate. And it just kind of took off. It was I sold the set of games to an organization in the Boston area. They're still being rented out, still being shared in the community out there, which is awesome. They've been to 80 events. Um, and then my wife found her next role here in the Bay Area where we had lived before. And I was like, okay, we're moving back. I'm going to build a second set. I'm going to build Climate Carnival 2.0 and start sharing them with the community. It's going to be an awesome way for me to kind of integrate with the sustainability community personally and get to know people, which is good for my mental health. Um, but also to really spread the word and get engagement around the message of the climate emergency. Um, and honestly, I couldn't be happier. It's really blown up. But it all started with a high school club event asking for just something to do at one of their events, like a game. And that's the origin.
Yeah, that's very inspiring. I think this is a really unique project, and I think it definitely shows how, these engaging ways of interacting with climate can definitely help, promote awareness. And so, you mentioned how these games are, I think they're made with like renewal or um, recycled materials, right? So what is the process of actually like physically building these games look like? How long does it take, and what is the process like?
Yeah, the games normally take, I mean, some are more complex than others, but I can normally get them done in about a week. One of the things I learned in working in theater is how to build things quickly and get them painted, get them dry, get them ready. And it's not really about having a perfect product. It's more about getting it out into the hands of people as quickly as possible. So I would say each one takes maybe a week. I do a lot of the design initially on the computer. Um, I work in SketchUp and kind of 3D model the concept to see, how it might fold, to get the scale of things and to get an idea of what materials I'm going to need before I go out and, yeah, find reclaimed wood, either on Facebook Marketplace or other friends who build things. They've got leftover packing materials.
Mhm.
And I just sort of grab them whenever I see them and stockpile them.
Yeah, that's definitely very amazing. And you mentioned kind of the extensive reach of the work. You mentioned like I think 80 schools, right? So are there any inspiring moments or moments of realization you had after interacting with all these people and kind of sharing your games with others?
Yeah, I've got Man, I mean, this is one of the reasons it compels me to keep going is I keep getting these little rewards. And it's mostly about conversation. Just going back to the reach for a second, I did a talk for 350 Silicon Valley, and I sat down and figured out, I was wondering how many people have actually played with the games total. Um, so yeah, the games in Boston have done 80 events. These games have done 40. It's 120 events, 10 games per event. Maybe 10 people play with them per event. That's like 12,000 people that have interacted with these games from,
Mhm.
that I built in the garage from like that, and they cost almost nothing to build. It was just time and electricity and some fasteners. It's just it kind of blew my mind when I figured that out. And even just this past weekend, actually, I was at the Bay Area Science Festival, where they have 10,000 people attend, and I'm sure it was a new record for the Climate Carnival. There were at least 600. I calculated it with the other
Wow.
people when we were driving home. At least 600 people passed through the games and like made music on the Tower of Found Sound, or played tipping point. They're all the games are busy for pretty much the whole 5 hours. It was just awesome. Anyway, so that
Mhm.
the reach is it does blow my mind. Anyway,
Mhm.
um, I'm sorry, bring me back to the original question.
Yeah, kind of any messages or inspiring stories you've heard from interacting with people and sharing these games.
Thank you. Picked up that thread. All right. Um, yeah, I wanted to say that like I think it fundamentally it's about conversations. It's about keeping communication about climate going. Because literally we have an administration right now that is trying to eliminate the word climate from policy. Like they don't, out of sight, out of mind. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want people talking about it. They want it swept under the rug so they can carry on with a fossil fuel agenda. Um, and so this is a really satisfying grassroots way to keep people engaged and keep people talking. And so you talk about anecdotes, things that stand out. So for instance, I've got something that's like Jenga. It's a tower of, 2x4s. Um, they're offcuts from the scene shop at the West Valley College theater department, just wood that would have been thrown out. But
Mhm.
on them, I had seen where at weddings people like put messages on the blocks. And I was like, well, these could be like interesting factoids about climate. Like
Yeah.
what did the gladiators eat? Was it mostly plants or mostly meat? And then the answer's on the back, and it's mostly plants. And seeing people, I just figured people would, stack the blocks, play the game, move on. But most people are genuinely, they stop, they want to read the questions, and sorry, they stop and they want to read the questions to each other, and it sparks little conversations. Like even kids who are pre-literate, can't read yet. They ask their older siblings to read. What does that say? They want to know. And so you hear like, oh, really? I didn't know that. And oh, taking my own container to a restaurant to bring my leftovers home. I never thought of that. And that's like if you've ever done that, you can skip your next turn sort of thing. Or if you're wearing
Mhm.
green, you can skip your next turn. Or if you haven't flown in an airplane in 4 months, skip your next turn. If you got here by walking or riding a bike or taking a bus, all these the little things to kind of engage and get conversations. There's another game where it's called Plant the Seeds. It's like a little game I had when I was a kid, where you roll marbles around and put them in specific holes. So a lot of the games that I was building were pretty negative, like tipping point and stuff like that. And I wanted something that was like positive things we could do every day to live a more sustainable life. So each of these holes is labeled, buy used things or choose solar energy or compost or eat less meat, eat more plants. Um, and the really cool thing is, if you're squatting down and a little kid's rolling the thing around and trying to get these marbles, which one are you? Oh, you're trying to get into the solar, and maybe their parent is there too. It's like, we have solar. That's awesome. Maybe you could put that energy into an electric car. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, we're working on that. We're getting there. Or yeah, we should probably compost more. Or we do compost, or we're fully vegetarian, or and it's talking about these different topics. There's 9 of them just on this little board. So it seems like a simple game, but that's that's kind of what it's all about, is starting these conversations around climate, um, in a really sort of a fun environment, where people's guards are kind of are down, and they're open to discussion.
Yeah, that's really inspiring to hear, not only the reach of, the 12,000 people you mentioned, but also the fact that there are people who are willing to engage, especially, little kids, I think is, very inspiring and it's great to hear. And I guess thinking on, a broader scale, do you see art, functioning differently from like science or policy when it comes to communicating the urgency of the climate crisis? Like, are there ways you think art could be integrated on a broader scale, to get the message across?
Yeah, I think it's pretty powerful. I mean, I've seen it firsthand, so I know it's pretty powerful. I don't have an analytical scientific mind, and like most people, it when I'll give you an anecdote. So like at these events where I have the games set up, um, normally I'm tabling with another organization and they have clipboards and they need signatures to move policy, right? And so a family will be involved with one of the games, and the people from the organization come over with a clipboard, and I can watch the body language change from, we're into it, we're moving, and then suddenly the clipboard appears like, oh, what's that about? What do they want from me? And so the guard goes up immediately. Um, and I think that's one of the strengths of art, is that it's people don't assume that it's that anything is being asked of them. I don't know, like I think traditionally there's people just have a reservation about engagement, because that's the most common way, is
Mhm.
signatures and clipboards. And there's nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's where people have sort of a barrier. And an analogy, I guess, for the games and for art is it's like a Trojan horse, you have a pretty
Mhm.
serious message, but it's wrapped in something that's kind of engaging and fun and appealing. Um, and it gets past sort of like the barriers that most people have, and they're much more open and accepting, to talk about the concepts of around the climate emergency. Yeah, you don't normally associate people having fun with, the crop shortages and oceans heating and mass die-offs of coral reefs, but
Mhm.
somehow these concepts can be integrated into the games, and it works on a whole different level than just policy and the regular methods that people use for communication.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it definitely shows how, of course, the climate crisis is serious, but there are definitely ways, like, enjoyable, fun ways that the message can, be delivered, especially to people that may not be interested or have the time to, educate themselves about these issues. So I think that's definitely like great to hear. Um, are there any challenges you face while, bringing your games to life? Um, anything significant there?
Yeah, mostly it's been awesome. Mostly it's just I couldn't have dreamed of it going as well as it has. Full
Mhm.
credit to my wife, who lets me kind of semi-retire and devote a lot of time to this, to organizing and building, but so that's not really a constraint. Neither is money, because the materials are mostly found.
Mhm.
So time and money aren't a problem. Um, Honestly, it's finding helpers. So I at these events, I see a lot of really engaged youth, which is awesome. I think it makes the message that much more powerful if people, your age, are the ones delivering the message. It seems that much more urgent. Um, and they're a lot of the people that actually do end up, helping me set up and run the games, which is great. They step up. And I'm building a pool of helpers. as time goes on. But I've been at it for about a year, so I've got a decent pool. But people are busy. Like during the summer, it's not too hard to find people to, to lend a hand setting up the games and to help facilitate, show people how the games are run. But now that school's back in, I gotta work a little bit harder at saying, hey, is this something you seem to be enjoying the games? Is this something that maybe you want to help with one day? And yeah, so I can either, I mean, for your audience, I can either give volunteer hours, for high school, or I can pay an hourly rate because some places I don't charge for nonprofits, but other businesses I say, if you're able to donate something, I do hire, school. I do hire helpers, and I think it's fair to compensate them. And usually people are really good about that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And another question I had kind of on the topic of challenges is, in terms of art, right, which maybe is more accessible, I guess, to a variety of audiences, have you encountered any instances where it's helped, break down maybe cultural barriers that would have otherwise prevented people from engaging with climate issues?
Um, yeah, I again, I think I think the people see climate as either they deny it, they dismiss it, and that's how they move forward by, just telling themselves it's not as big a problem as it actually is. That's one way. Or if they realize what a massive problem it is, they compartmentalize it and set it aside, like the media of, wildfires and floods and people recovering after massive storms, all these symptoms of the climate emergency. Understandably, people limit how much exposure they have to that, and so that ends up being a barrier, which totally makes sense. I think that it's not healthy to kind of dwell on it and let it really get at you. So culturally, people, for one reason or another, protect themselves from the really heavy message, the existential threat that is the climate crisis. Um, and so, like we're saying, though, the games kind of circumvent that, and it's like you're just coming to play, and you can. I'm not hammering the point about environmentalism either. You can also just have fun playing. But if the person is in a position to, want to ask questions or explore or engage, um, you do hear these little conversations start up, like that kid was playing with their mom, and it's a game called Tipping Point, and it's like a disc, and you put assets onto the disc until it no longer can balance, and it represents the Earth, and all the things slide off. But one of the things is like oceans heating, and to hear a little voice say, why is oceans heating bad? I like warm water. It feels good to swim in it. Um, and then, the mom says, well, maybe this guy knows. And it's just an opportunity to say, well, the ocean needs to be a very specific temperature. And if it gets too warm, then the fish don't like it. And if the fish aren't happy, every second breath we take is oxygen from the oceans. And it's very important that the ocean works properly and is the right temperature. So there's these conversations that open up, and it just gets around the barriers, the cultural barriers, yeah, about being open to talking about climate because it's kind of depressing, the more you learn about it, or again, if you're just like, no, I don't believe it. It's just, I think they're just ways for people to cope. And this is a way kind of to communicate with them, even though they're using the coping mechanisms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's very inspiring, especially, to see how art is not only, I think, a unique medium to, explore these climate issues, but can also help break down barriers, inform people in a much more engaging way. And so, you mentioned earlier on the topic of youth, right, that there are youth that are, being involved. Can you elaborate more on what role you think youth should play in the climate movement or how youth can kind of get involved, at least on a local level, maybe?
100%. Yeah. Like I said, I think the messenger is almost more important than the message often.
Mhm.
I mean, normally you see people with gray hair, older people. They're the ones, the NPR tote bag crowd that are out marching and engaged, because they have time and they have often the means to do it. Um, when you see kids sacrificing their time and being engaged and concerned, you know, uh, that, like I said, that's more compelling. Um, and I think that if you bring whatever you're interested in to the climate movement, that's the important thing. That really resonated with me to hear that if you like to write, or if you're good at organizing, or if you are outgoing and extrovert, like talking to people, there's a role for every personality trait in the climate movement. Mine happened to be creating things, but you can plug yourself into whatever your interest is, making movies, writing stories, calling people, meeting people. There's so many different ways to use your interest um, as a strength to make real change.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, and then my last question to you, and I know you kind of already touched on this, but what advice would you give to someone, especially, young people who are interested in, starting climate work, but don't really know where to start, maybe are scared of sort of larger scale movements? What kind of advice would you give to someone?
Um, that to take the first step can be daunting. To go on your first rally, it feels like a big deal. But the feeling of being engaged with like-minded people who are, you know, excited and they're energized, that's contagious, you know. Um, yeah, action is the best antidote to anxiety. I was very anxious about the future. And then when I started to work, with Extinction Rebellion in Boston, just sitting around making banners, chit-chatting about the administration, or, about how hot it is, or about something at world events, things that are on your mind, like, hey, these same things are on their mind as well. So maybe it starts with a club at school, or if you're no longer in school, you can reach out. There's so many clubs that are looking for people to do whatever, bring whatever they can, and be engaged. And it really feels good to know that you're not alone.
Yeah, that's, such amazing advice and also a very powerful note to end on. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences and insights. It was very, very valuable.
My pleasure enough. Thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah. So that's all we have today on Voices for Climate. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the show and share it with someone who cares about building a more sustainable future. And I'll see you all next time. Thank you.